Ngowi TV, informed economists and business perspective.
So the definition, as I said, the definition of local content, notwithstanding different countries have defined it slightly differently or rather emphasize different elements of this definition. This is the reason we have invited Madam Mbaga. She is heading, directing local content overall for Tanzania. So she will tell us how do we understand it in Tanzania, which aspect do we emphasize? Is it employment? Is it local inputs, intermediate inputs? What is it that we want as Tanzanians? She will tell us.
This holistic approach to the whole aspect, and I'll go on maintaining, of national participation. Whether you use the value chain approach, use local economic development perspective or whatever, but eventually the whole thing must be holistic. The whole of the nation, the whole of government, the whole of academia, the whole of the private sector must be one in this approach.
Our education has to change. We have to change. Our education curriculum has to change. Why is our education curriculum so static? And why do we expect to be owners of oil fields and these things if our education is still the same? Wakati wa ujamaa angalau tulikuwa tunapigwa msasa kuimba ujamaa from primary school, and we believed in it because we are singing it. Today, is anybody singing about being a shareholder in the oil company? No, I don't think so. They are not even ambitious for anything. Maybe for music. They want to be like Diamond. Ask your children. They will not tell you I want to be an engineer. They'll tell you I want to be like Diamond.
And then the other most important thing, yes, we're talking about having policies in place, having legislations in place, but at the end of the day, if we don't have regulations, then it becomes almost impossible to force an investor or any organization that they need to adhere to certain procurement. So your example of that now the mining sector was supposed to procure locally, but they were not procuring. If there are no regulations, it's difficult to enforce. So I think the other thing that we always need to take into account is how do we take the discussion further post-policy, post-legislation, and having in place regulations.
Based on the point discussed so earlier, and I thought that yes, we could first of all think about understanding this concept of local content. In my own view, a simple way of looking at this is to see whatever value chain that we can imagine, and we present it as a pie or a pie chart. And then through such a pie chart, you can now determine the share or the percentage of your participation from that pie chart.
It is only through strong collaborations, that is what I believe, that it is only through strong collaborations between all the stakeholders, which I believe is the government, because the government has to put the conducive environment for local content to take place. That is putting the policies, putting the legal framework, and also supporting locals in terms of capacity building. And for the private sector, it is for them now to take up the opportunity to build their capacities, to make sure that they reach the standards and qualifications which are required for them to participate in the investments.
It was quite robust and took into account most of the things that has been discussed here. And it is a definition made by Tanzanians for Tanzania. So it removes the fact that this was a definition given to us. And actually it is a definition that was highly contested by outsiders and some insiders. So I think I would urge all of you, if you want to understand how we can get local content in agriculture, we should try and understand the definition in that policy and see how can it be better framed or rephrased or whatever to suit the agricultural sector. And then the other most important thing, yes, we're talking about having policies in place, having legislations in place, but at the end of the day, if we don't have regulations, then it becomes almost impossible to force an investor or any organization that they need to adhere to certain procurement. So your example of that now the mining sector was supposed to procure locally, but they were not procuring. If there are no regulations, it's difficult to enforce. So I think the other thing that we always need to take into account is how do we take the discussion further post-policy, post-legislation, and having in place regulations. There was a question on where do we start in the agricultural sector and how do we know the current local participation in the agriculture sector. I think the current participation is known. 60 to 70% of Tanzanians are in agriculture, but most of them are in farming. So we need to look at the other points of the value chain in terms of processing, marketing, export, etc. I think that is where maybe the focus can be, but if it's to know how many Tanzanians participate in agriculture, that one is known. Then there was issues about participation of local content, whether it should be local or national. I think what we need to understand is the term local content represents national, the country. And under local content, there are three main areas that you achieve local content by. One is through employment opportunities, that is employment to Tanzanians. Two, it is through procurement of goods and services by local companies. And the last one, which is the strategic community involvement, which represents the social to license and the involvement of the community. However, one of the biggest things collectively we need to do is, although local company is pegged towards ownership, that a company that is owned by a Tanzanian, but we go back to making sure our policies need to all reflect the same, because if you look at BRELA, under the definition of local company, it's any company registered in Tanzania. So when you're now talking of local content and reporting, it is confusing, and you will not necessarily get the correct data, because if you go by that definition, which is the definition under BRELA, it also involves all foreign businesses that are registered in the country. They are local businesses. But when we talk about local content, we are focusing on those businesses owned by Tanzanians. So it is important for these definitions to be clear across the board, and if need be, the revision within the BRELA Act should adopt this definition, because when it comes to reporting, then there will be an issue. A business will report that they've spent 40% of their procurement budget on local businesses, but when you come to actually drill down, you will find that actually no. Maybe 99% of that 40% is foreign companies registered in Tanzania. So then automatically you get the wrong understanding and wrong analysis of your entire local content. So I think that was also important to flesh out. There was a question about SAGCOT. Basically the SAGCOT initiative is taking the cluster approach, and the SAGCOT region the whole corridor has about 9 regions, starting from Dar es Salaam, Bagamoyo, Morogoro, Iringa, Njombe, Mbeya, Songwe, Katavi, Rukwa, etc. But when the initiative started, it did not start across all regions. So it was decided to start in one cluster, which is the Hemi cluster, made up of Iringa and Njombe. And next year we're moving into the next cluster. And in that approach, it creates an opportunity to look at the entire value chain. So when you're talking about the agricultural value chain, you're not only looking at the market, you need to look at the inputs, make sure that the farmers are getting the right seeds with the quality so that they can get the right yield, get the right fertilizer, right pesticides, etc. And also along the entire cluster, you have to look at the policy framework, the legislative and the regulatory framework, and whether it is an enabling environment, it creates an enabling environment for that sector to thrive. Where do we enter in these value chains? I think most importantly we need to do realistic situation analysis that showcase where are we at the moment, what can we do at the moment, and once we know what we can do at the moment, those sort of percentages, other countries use them to peg them in the regulations. So for instance, if you can get, let's take an example of air travel services. So a service like air travel, really, let's say the local content regulation can peg that 100% of air travel service should be done by locally owned business. Because we have that capacity, we know that we have that capacity. But in absence of that, you find that an organization is based in Dar es Salaam, but if they have their HQ in Houston, then even the local travel tickets are booked by a travel agent based in Houston. So those are things which, yes, we have a law that stipulates what needs to be done, but we don't have the regulation that clearly stipulates how that will be done. So that is a gap where I think most of our efforts now need to be towards ensuring that our regulations are robust enough. But how can they be? They need to be informed. So we need to know what can we currently do. And in the areas that we are not able to do, you give leeway of time, but there needs to be strategic efforts to improve our capacity in order for us to be able to do that. There was a lot of discussion about seed, that at the moment Tanzania doesn't produce its own seeds. One thing that is important to mention is most of these developments for a country to have, you need to have international accreditation. And that is something the government has been working towards. And the fortunate thing of SAGCOT, us being PPP, so we kind of wear both private sector hat and public sector hat. And I think the government through the Minister of Agriculture can be commended by the fact that Tanzania now is registered and accredited in all the required international accreditation for seeds. So I think going forward, this issue would be better resolved, because prior, even if you produce your own seeds, you're not able to sell them out of Tanzania because we don't have the right accreditation. So I think those are efforts that are collective efforts, and when those efforts are made, we need to recognize those efforts as well. There was a point about he raised of an enterprise development center. I think that's a very good idea, and it's something that we all advocate for. But enterprise development centers need to be independent, so they don't sit under a government or under an academic institution. They sit independently by people who have the expertise in nurturing and developing small businesses to thrive in the particular economy. The same examples, the countries that he mentioned, all of them had those enterprise development centers, but they were independent and they were managed by people with practical entrepreneur experience and things like that. And all in all, to sum up, you can't get local content without foreign content. Of course. So I think we need to recognize and appreciate that. In order for us to get ahead, we need the foreign content in place. But it's just how can that foreign content be structured in such a way that it creates a win-win situation for Tanzania and its people. Thank you.